All right, well, I think we are ready to start, so let's go ahead with that. So good afternoon, bonsoir, buenas tardes, and welcome to the second in a series of artist conversations associated with the Archipelago exhibition, which is presently on view at the Maison du Fort in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. My name is Veerle Poupeye, and I am an art historian, curator, and critic based in Kingston, Jamaica. The Archipelago exhibition and this series of conversations with the participating artists is presented as part of a larger project of the Haitian Arts Institution, the Centre d'Art, also in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, whose central element was a series of exchange residencies for Haitian and other Caribbean women artists. Through partnerships with Fresh Milk in Barbados, Alice Yard in Trinidad and Tobago, the Taller Experimental de Grafica in Havana, Cuba, the Proyecto Anticanon in the Dominican Republic, New Local Space, and the Edna Manley College in Jamaica, 9 women artists were able to carry out their artistic residencies. 5 artists from Haiti and the Haitian diaspora participated. Mafalda Mondestin went to Cuba, Phaedra McQueen turned to the Dominican Republic, Pascale Faublas to Barbados, Pascale Monnin to Trinidad, and Pascale Bichot, Jamaica. We had a lot of Pascals in this project. Kia Redmond from Barbados and Miriam Hines-Smith from Jamaica did their residencies at the Centre d'Art in Haiti, while Michelle Ricardo from the Dominican Republic and Nadia Huggins from St. Vincent went to Jacmel in southern Haiti, where they were associated with this, where they were hosted rather by the studios of the Haitian artist Ronald Meus. The residencies lasted for 1 month and more than 70 works were created, of which 51 are on view in Archipelago. The project also involved curatorial training, which was offered at the Centre d'Art in January of this year. I presented this course and I curated the Archipelago exhibition with the trainees in this course. The program also included a recently concluded course in art criticism, which was offered by the Cuban art historian and critic Yolanda Wood, and which was open to Haitian and Caribbean participants. Some of the essays that were produced as a part of this program will feature in the Archipelago exhibition catalog, which is in preparation with publication planned in late June. The residency, exhibition, and training course program was funded by UNESCO's International Fund for Cultural Diversity. A little bit of housekeeping before I hand over to the artist and to Christopher Cozier, who will moderate the discussion. So today's conversation will be in English, but simultaneous interpretation is offered in French and Spanish. If you would like to use interpretation, please go to the interpretation button, the globe at the bottom of your screen, and select the appropriate language channel. The conversation is also streamed live on Facebook on the Centre d'Art timeline, but interpretation is only available on Zoom. So please join us on that platform if you require the service. The conversation will subsequently be uploaded to the Centre d'Art's YouTube channel. There will be a question and answer segment towards the end of today's program, at which time live questions and comments will be accommodated, but you can also post comments and questions in the Zoom and Facebook chat sections during and after the conversation. We invite you to participate in this way as it is an important part of the dialogues that we wish to have. Today, our second conversation related to the Archipelago exhibition is with Haitian artist Pascale Monnin, who did her residency at Alice Yard in Port of Spain, and Nadia Huggins from St. Vincent and Trinidad and Tobago, who did her residency in Jacmel at the studios of Ronald Meus, as I mentioned earlier on. The conversation will be moderated by the Trinidadian artist, curator, and art writer Christopher Cozier, who is co-director of Alice Yard. So without further ado, I now hand over to Christopher, Pascale, and Nadia.
Okay, thanks, Barry. Thanks, everyone, for making this moment possible. I'm not gonna spend too much time, with too many fussy things. I thought what I would do is let the artists start their presentations. So I don't know. I'm assuming I came on, I saw Pascale's thing being tested. So I don't know if Pascale, you will make your presentation.
With pleasure.
And then it will be followed by Nadia. In terms, do we have a kind of an idea about length? Do I remind you? How do we, what's the, does that have a fixed thing for the length? Or?
Sure, we have about 45, 50 minutes for your conversation. If it widens down naturally, we'll just switch over to the question and answer segment. If you go over that time, I will just switch on my camera and you will see me appear as a signal that,
so I was concerned about them in terms of the time for their presentations, like
I would say perhaps 10 minutes for an opening statement each, and then we can take it from there. Right?
Okay, wonderful. Pascale, you move right on ahead. I'll keep an eye on the time.
Okay, lovely. So, hello, everybody. And it was really a great time in Trinidad and Tobago, which was a discovery, as it was my first time, and being there at Alice Yard with Chris, with everybody from Alice Yard was a pleasure. And it was, I had decided to work on the shape of the eggs, birth and rebirth, a certain history of women. And so for months, I worked obsessively around the egg. So you can go next on the slideshow. So here what you see was the studio. So that's the subject, and next. And that's who is Sean Leonard, Nicholas, and Christopher, or still next. So one of my angel guardian was Junior. And that's something I always love when I get to a place I don't know, is to just go sit in the street and look how the neighborhood exists. And Junior is, let's say, own a part of the road in front of the studio, and is absolutely fascinated by artists and art. And it was also a great way to see how people interact. And I would say I felt at home really fast. And the way people, I mean, Junior just sits there and he's, let's say, the memory, and he has all the stories of the streets. And so there was a portrait of him. Next. So as said, I was working on the eggs. So for me, I decided to go through generations of women and a bit how somehow we are the emerged face of a long line of other women. And I think that you are being born once, supposedly, but during a lifetime, you're going to have to reinvent and go through different stages. So in this working that shape and that idea really made me question, you know, the idea of when does it begin? When does it end? Is there a possibility to actually grow and grow again and be born again? So it was through those this shape that little by little I decided also to work. Let's go next. I decided to work, and here you're going to see the shape of the egg, but it's a bit like a medallion, because one day with Christopher we were where they sell materials, and I could see the shape of the canvases, like the oval, you know, the portraits. So I bought one of those, and that made me want to relate to those different generations. So you have that little girl that was my, let's say, main character, at least in the big paintings. And it's my daughter. And the idea was to have both grandmothers at the same time, the one from Haiti and the one from Europe, because Caribbean is place of crossroads and encounters. And so I wanted to kind of experience that. And even Idel Monde that you see on the left, or maybe is in the back of us, there is always those little shape of eggs. And of course, a game around the who comes first, the egg or the hen. And so next. And here it's the work of Mr. Cozier, who I respect absolutely. And when I saw that installation he made, Turbulences, and it's true that also the Caribbean is a place of turbulences between the hurricanes, the earthquake. And so, of course, really, I related to that work really strongly. And the other thing that it made me think of is how we are all often have to think our works so that they can travel. So I really thought that this installation is extremely intelligent in terms of how impressive it gets. It plays with the light and so I wanted to do a reinterpretation, and but it was a bit of a joke, answering with girls' materials. And so instead of the architect pins and the ficelle and the wood, I took washing cloth and trash bags and how do you say that, pince for the hair, the things you put in your hair. So it was a way to play around those lines. And of course, you can see in that the blue one, the different shades, and it's a bit like a vitrol. I mean, how do you say vitrail in English? That's a good question. Anyways, next. So here it was also a bit of a reflection about the blues and the blues in terms of colors, and the blues in terms of destruction and let's say the turbulences in our different histories. And there I proposed the work of different artists. The first one is Mario Benjamin. The second one is one of mine in Dakar that was from a house that was destroyed in Matthew. Then you have the Dominican artist Carlos Reed reacting to the earthquake, and Duval Carrier. And always, I think we have in common the sea. And I think Nadia is gonna give us some of those blues as well. Okay, next. That's also what fascinated me, is as far as we can be. I mean, it's funny because when I got to Trinidad, I realized that Haiti has a part in the mind of Trinidadians, whereas in Haiti, almost none. And when I saw the carnival and the characters, I was amazed because I really felt at home. And thanks to Kristen, who's really involved with the carnival, even if this year, because of COVID reason, there was no real carnival, I had the chance to be able to see a lot of images and experience a bit of carnival. So next. So here, I wanted to play around with different images of Trinidad and Haiti. And I think to find those people in Haiti on the big sticks, I had to look for that image real far, because we actually don't have so many. But as they were all around the studio, and it's true that experiencing that, I began to dream to have some of the Moko Djembe come to Jacques Mel at the time of Carnival, and the contrary, because really I think we have so many in common. There's differences, and I think we could learn a lot from each other. And there would be kind of a sentiment of a recognition. Next. The other way around. Yes. that's the work of Robert Young, and that's being at Alice Yard on the street level. He's actually he has a place called The Cloth. And so while being there, I thought it was more about fashion. And then when I saw those images of the costumes he created for Carnival, I was extremely touched and thought his works were beautiful. So then, of course, I put some other images of costumes in Haiti, where I could find a link in the materials, in the characters. Next.
And Pascale, you have about 2 more minutes. I'll let you run over a bit.
I think I'm almost done. So here is Leah Gordon. Those were traditional and an older type of costumes that maybe you don't see as much. Next. And so I propose a correlation between the two countries. Next. And I think we're almost there. Yes, and thanks to everybody. So that was a bit the compte rendu of my residency there.
Okay.
So Nadia.
Thank you, Pascale. Okay, Nadia, so you can jump right in.
Okay. Supposed to share my screen. Yep. Okay. So how do I begin at this? I guess, Chris approached me in November, sort of last minute, to take on this residency. Obviously with COVID, a lot of things had gotten pushed back, and I had just sort of gone through a catastrophic event in St. Vincent. We had a volcanic eruption in April, and I think just kind of the timing and everything. Chris thought it might have been interesting to position me in Jacmel. I'm not really sure if he had the intentions of me talking about this kind of like natural disaster kind of situation, but it was kind of difficult to not address it in some way in my work. But of course, on arriving there, I sort of started to uncover all these different things. Next slide, please. So initially, when I actually, the project I had proposed was to work in the ocean, because I had assumed, Jacmel was a coastal village and I would be able to do a lot of work there. But of course, in your mind, you have one idea to do something, and then you get to a place and you realize you have all these limitations. And one of the limitations was that, the coastline was really rough, really difficult for me to get in, and the opacity of the water was really impossible to see anything in. So I couldn't really work underwater per se, because originally I had wanted to do, works with women in the sea. And then of course, encountering that moment, I realized a lot of women in the Caribbean don't really engage in the ocean in the same way that men do. So those kind of limitations actually kind of opened up a new way of me looking at the work I was doing, and kind of shifting my gaze away from the ocean. But I did photograph these 2 images. Next slide, please. These young boys who were just along the shore, bobbing up and down. And it's a very sort of simple image, but I tried to kind of approach it with the perspective of me getting into the water and kind of looking at that landscape of island from the sea. Every island that you go to in the Caribbean, you sort of have a point of view of another place. It's like you're always seeing one place from another. If you're in Trinidad, you can see Venezuela. Well, it's a country. You can see Venezuela from St. Vincent. You can see St. Lucia. From St. Lucia, you can see Martinique, and so on and so on. And I started to kind of play with that idea of how to incorporate the land gradually into the work that I was doing. Next slide, please. So, I took a lot of images. Being in Jacmel was just visually one of the most stimulating experiences I've ever had. Even though, I always try to find these similarities between Caribbean countries when I go, and I find Haiti just kind of totally, threw that out of my head, and I had to kind of, just be open to a lot of what was going on there and try to understand things without being able to really communicate with people verbally. You know, I spent a lot of time just walking or driving, and walking with people mostly in silence. So just, you know, observing movements and body language and trying to understand the landscape I was in. And one of the things that kind of always comes up recently in my work is like, especially thinking about the Caribbean in regards to the environment, and how we look at these landscapes. You know, a lot of times when we, you know, when people from the outside come in and document us, it's always the land without the people. It's kind of like, you know, this kind of tropical paradise without people really and truly existing in it. So I wanted to try and incorporate people into the landscape in sort of like gradual ways that reminded the viewer of their presence. Next slide. So this work, when you think is bush is people, I mean, that's like a famous expression we use in some of the islands down here. And it's just like, you always think that you're alone in nature without anybody interrupting you. But the truth is, there's always someone there kind of observing you while you're observing nature. So I played a bit with this concept in some of the preliminary images I created. And this was a young woman that I, you know, she had been assisting me, going on walks with me and just kind of looking at me photograph a lot of trees. Like, she would assist me and kind of point out things to me, because she, over time, she realized what I was looking for. And even though we weren't able to really communicate again verbally, like we kind of had this unspoken language between each other, that we were able to kind of bridge a gap through just observations in nature. So this is an image I took of her while we went on one of our walks. Next slide, please. So the other thing, you know, obviously just thinking about catastrophes, so like earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, I really started to kind of shift my gaze looking at just rocks, the landscape. I mean, just thinking about the geology of the Caribbean, the way the islands have been formed, you know, just thinking of like the movement of like the plates and how things kind of happen gradually over time. And I spent a lot of time just talking to Ronald, like in the evenings, having these like very long discussions about geology and rocks. And, you know, he made this reference to Columbus coming to Haiti for the first time and saying, when he went back to communicate to the Queen and what he saw, he crumpled a piece of paper, and, you know, basically the landscape of that paper is what Haiti was like, just like this mountainous country. So I thought there was something really poetic about that. And I like the idea of kind of working with that crumpled landscape and figuring out ways to incorporate it gradually into the work I was doing there. Next slide, please. So this is a kind of establishing shot of the mountain range I was flying over on my way from Port-au-Prince to Jacmel. And, you know, again, just kind of looking at the land as is in a very contemporary way. I mean, looking at the way some areas are pretty deforested, but still there's a kind of a vastness and beauty to it. And I wanted to be able to kind of use that as a foundation into like some of the other pieces that I was creating. Next slide, please. So the other things I was sort of observing while I was there was obviously, you know, just nature. You know, we kind of get this narrative of Haiti from the outside of, you know, being a place stricken with poverty, you know, like heavily deforested. And of course, like I tried to go into the situation with a very open mind and not make these assumptions of all this information I had been flooded with by the media, and just looking at things from my own perspective. And of course, when I get there, I realize there's just like a tremendous amount of natural resources that are not being highlighted, and just strange kind of like, you know, trees and things happen in the landscape that I don't usually see in a smaller place like St. Vincent. I mean, obviously, like the landscape and the forested areas we have here are vastly different. But there was just kind of something, it was kind of hard to divorce the sort of spiritual aspect of what I know of Haiti from what I was observing in nature as well. So I was trying to kind of pull all these elements together to put together a body of work that could speak to all these different aspects of what I was seeing in Jacmel. Next slide, please. So another thing I had noticed, a tremendous amount of people carrying objects in their head. And again, this is, kind of an image of like the type of labor people are doing. And I found that really striking. But again, like I didn't want to necessarily play into that narrative of perpetuating this image of, the market woman, or, somebody carrying a bunch of bananas in their head, or somebody riding a donkey. I mean, obviously these things exist, but they're also just images that are like completely overdone at this point. And I've just been trying to figure out like ways to conceptually work with these sort of things happening in the areas. Next slide, please. So yeah, these are sort of more moments of people just carrying tremendous things on their heads. Next slide. So yeah, again, just sort of thinking about the geology of the land. I had done a project, Transformations, which some of you might be familiar with, where I'm merging my own body with marine organisms underwater. And in that series, I'm playing with 2 panels as well, but in a sort of different way, where both objects are kind of coming into contact with each other, but not quite touching. So that kind of plays with the idea of like that tension that you have in the ocean, where nothing can really, these 2 worlds can't really become one, because they're sort of living in very separate realities. People can't exist in the ocean, and marine organisms can't exist in the land. So there's a kind of a space between the images that plays with that tension. So I wanted to kind of build on that a bit. And, I created these sketches now kind of referencing the plate tectonic movements that could speak to the earthquake in Haiti without being explicit and like necessarily feeding into that sort of disaster porn imagery that we're so accustomed to seeing coming out to the island. So yeah, I started to play with these sort of sliding landscapes. And next slide, please. So these are the images that should be exhibited now. And I created 4 images. All of the girls, young women that I worked with are from the Laku that I was in Ronald's home. And, I spent time trying to build relationships with them and really just understand what their relationship was like to the land. And sort of merging this idea of the plate tectonics, merging this idea of the landscape changing, thinking about like how the contemporary woman in Haiti kind of exists within this space without necessarily playing into this narrative of like images that we've seen before of people being documented in Haiti. Next slide, please. So then I started to kind of create these, strange kind of creatures. I think of it as kind of like building like an ecosystem of creatures. So, like I have like the marine organisms, and now I have like these kind of earthquake creatures adapting to the landscape. And I've been thinking about it in terms of carnival. I think similar to Pascale, it's sort of hard to not be influenced by carnival culture in some way, especially in a place like Jacmel, where it's so vibrant, and like coming from a place like Trinidad, where it's also so rich, it finds a way to infiltrate itself into your work somehow. So I've been kind of thinking of these creatures as like a carnival band, so like they're broken up into sections. I have like the ocean experience and these marine organisms coming out of it, and then these sort of creatures on land, and then like a kind of a moko jambi with like on like dead trees coming out to the volcano. So I've been thinking a lot about the images in this way moving forward, and just kind of playing with that 2 slide, the 2 images kind of sliding past each other to build this kind of narrative of people existing in relation to the land. Next slide, please.
Nadia, I think you should, I don't know how far into your presentation you are, but you should try to sum it up in the next minute or 2. Yeah.
No problem. Yeah, I only have 2 more slides. So again, it's just these 4 images, and they reference, different parts of the tree. So, there's a fruit, there's a trunk, and then there's a root, which was the slide before. You can switch to next slide. Yeah, and just kind of trying to play with these images in a very formal way. and thinking about, our relationship ultimately to the environment and how we're going to create images moving forward that tell these stories in a much more nuanced way. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. I will, I had two kind of staging questions about the presentations, which I hope will be a bridge to things that people will ask. One has to do, and both of y'all can respond, to do with accident. Because I think with what we've learned through the process of Aliciad, one of the best essays that came out of the whole Aliciad experience was written by Charles Campbell of Jamaica when he came, and it was called Failure in the Yard. Failure in the sense that he came with one objective and then found himself having to adapt and then discovering some other things. So residencies are sometimes things that interrupt the normal process. You find yourself responding to the environment, and that takes you in, in new directions. That's one side of the question. And then the other thing that I found interesting is that both of you all reference Carnival, which is linked. But I think one of the things that interests me about Carnival amongst the current generations is in the past, Carnival was seen as a sort of something you represent, with traditional forms like painting. It was like you painted Carnival, you represented Carnival as culture. But I think the big transition in the last, say, 20 years or so is that it's the process of Carnival, its improvisational element, its performativity. So both works begin to reference Carnival, but not as a motif, but as a kind of process you engage either through materiality or through the way you kind of compose and arrange things. So I wanted to throw out those two questions, and then let's see where we go from there. I don't know who wants to go first, Nadia or Pascale, but both of you all can respond to both questions.
I think somehow, at least for me, the most evident links were there. And then, as you said, I didn't feel like I had or wanted to work in that frame. But that's, or at least for me, because of course it's really different places and different history and people from different backgrounds, India, China. So it is quite different, but suddenly when it comes to Carnival, it's like stunning. I mean, I don't know how you felt, Nadia, but really like felt so close to home. So, but it's funny because when you talk about the girls passing by with everything on their heads and everything, without wanting it, I ended up doing a painting with a woman carrying chicken on their head. And also because it's so classic that sometimes you want to revisit the it's like you can't help it. and so it's true to actually relate to older motifs and try and give it another layer is interesting.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in terms of the residency experience, you always go in with one idea, and as you say, like, you kind of go into it to fail in a way. And there's something kind of terrifying about that. You get into like a loop of your comfort zone. I know how to photograph a specific thing in the ocean because I've done it for so long. So you kind of have to like work a creative muscle that you're not used to working in your own home, I mean, and that's kind of the beauty of doing residencies. It kind of pushes you out of that comfort zone a bit. But yeah, I mean, in relation to Carnival, I definitely agree that I can see a lot of similarities in the way people embody costumes in both places. I mean, obviously there are like slight differences in terms of the characters. I mean, but the essence of what they represent is fairly similar in some ways. But yeah, I mean, I think I've just been trying to think about the work I've been doing as not being explicitly discussing one thing, but trying to reference things, and kind of create a new way of looking at these things that we so like comfortably reference all the time. You know, it's hard to break out of that mold of, you know, photographing the woman with the you know, the things on her head, or like whatever it is, like the like in the project that Chris and I worked on together, like a woman in front of a parlor, you know, selling like snacks or whatever, you know, like it's easy to fall into that loop because it's images that we've seen before, and it's always going to be there in our mind to reference somehow. So yeah, I think the beauty of doing residency is kind of like forces you to kind of look at these things and confront them, and then think of new ways of like remixing them.
Yeah, I was kind of curious. That's a really good point, Nadia. I was kind of curious. It's clear in terms of, I think, Nadia's presentation. I was kind of curious about yours, Pascale, whether you felt your process was interrupted in any way by working in another Caribbean island. Did you feel that you were sort of interrupted or challenged in any way by that shift?
Yeah.
I would say that I was reborn because here in France, I was not painting. I was not working as I wanted to. And for me, finding myself, and I think you've seen that in Trinidad, in that atelier, I just worked. And so I maybe didn't take the time. I mean, Chris, I was proposed to go to the beach quite a few times. It was like, you know what? I'm going to stay at the atelier. So I really let myself. So to me, it was a bit of on the contrary. I wasn't disturbed by it. On the contrary, I found a space that allowed me to be free again.
Yeah, I actually, while Pascale was there, I actually encouraged a lot of young artists who would say to me, oh, you know, gosh, I'm really struggling because Pascale's rate of production seemed, you know, almost excessive.
Factory-like.
Yeah, but in a sense, that was, sometimes it's not the impact the location has on you when your practice, is also the impact you have on the location as well. But I think a lot of people were quite astonished that, you know, that you kind of bunker down in the space, and it's a very busy space. You know, Grandison is not, it's a space about interaction. So to be able to bunker in and have such a rate and scale of production in that kind of busyness. I think during the time you were there, weren't there young fellows start coming in and starting to build Mokujambi things? Or I can't remember.
They almost began. They were supposed to come, but they actually stepped in, I think, just right when I left.
Yeah, and there was all kinds of rehearsals going on and people coming and going. And I think everybody was just astonished. You know, it was just the rate, you know, the amount of work that was taking shape. So it gave people something to think about, you know, because they're in their comfort space and they say they have so many problems in terms of how to proceed. And then you're in a space that you're completely unfamiliar with, and you had to kind of set up shop, an improvised studio, and then, you know, go down the line.
But what is funny, if they had come to Val-les-Roses, I wouldn't have a space and be able to show them things I was working on, because I was actually working on my computer. Mm-hmm. So it's I think the exchange happened there somehow. I mean, to me, the loop, you know, or I don't know how to say it.
I was actually intrigued by Nadia saying that she was challenged in the sense that one of the images, the name evades me right now, but the one with the two photos with the young woman and the tree inverted, I found compositionally and structurally, there's something quite astonishing there in terms of how land becomes fluid. So that image, in terms of its compositional structure, infers some of the kinds of things that you had done the other one, before that.
Almost the sea.
Yeah, look at that, you know.
I think my limitation was not so much finding things to photograph, because there was always something to photograph, but my limitation was finding a way to respectfully approach people and the space and do it justice in a way that wouldn't feed into that narrative of what Haiti is. And I think I kept on like butting heads with myself constantly, like, is this being respectful? Like, you know, I kind of felt like a responsibility to be ethical in the way I approached it. And, you know, when you come from one place that has a certain cultural norms, and then you go to another place, I mean, it's always kind of a challenge to figure out how to do things in a way that not just is going to make a beautiful image or something striking, but that also like has use to the people, you know, where you're photographing as well. So, and I think that's kind of always the center of what I do now. I want to make sure that the spaces that I'm photographing do it justice and honors people, and then can go outside and then become something else, you know?
Yeah.
And in that sense, I think, at least, or my reaction to what I've seen and some of the images that are not presented they're almost abstract or little chairs, but the materials felt extremely important. And I love it when I look at the pictures of someone and I feel I hadn't seen it, even if you're because being from a place doesn't mean you own it. And it was a great journey with you in Jacmel.
It's I mean, what's weird about the Caribbean, I think, is that so many people come into the Caribbean and look in, and in a sense, by looking in, there's like a known project. You know, it's like if you go to Paris, you know, the standard tourist shot of Paris is to go and stand and with the Eiffel Tower in the background, right? Everybody takes that shot, or they go to Sacré-Cœur or something, you know, and they stand on the steps or whatever. In a way, sitting the tropes of representing the Caribbean that exists across art, news, and tourist photography, you know. So it's always a challenge. You know, but I think there's something interesting when we have to look at, you know, when a person moves from one island to a next, because it becomes sometimes, I mean, every island has its variation, but it often becomes a kind of outer body experience as well, you know, because we kind of see a mirror reflection of something we know in its variance, and it's a tense thing, because the thing called the Caribbean is so already represented that we are now actually involved in the process of interrupting in the commodity, because I don't want to be naive about it. The people that live in these spaces also commodify that thing. It's a thing for exchange, you know, because one of the weirdest things about the Caribbean is so much of what we call art and culture is about exchange. You know, because, you know, it's always about displaying ourselves to somebody. So it's kind of interesting when we then talk to each other or look at each other, then something changes about the conditions, you know, like, why am I looking at you? Why are you looking at me? Because it's usually an external exchange. So I'm kind of curious about that in terms of what you, Nadia, talked about in terms of, you know, you see the lady with the bucket on her head carrying things, because I saw it too when I go to Haiti and I see it, you know, and then you kind of question yourself, why am I looking at this? Why am I taking a picture of this.
Yeah.
And before, and I don't know what your feelings are in context of being in Port of Spain, Pascal, but you know, like when you get to another location, how do you feel about what you see? And what is the purpose of seeing, you know, in such an overly determined environment? Mhm.
The truth, often when I go somewhere, if there is 3 places that you have to see, I make sure I don't go see them. That's the first step. And so I have a tendency to merge in a space and that then let hazard, I mean, I need material. Christopher, can you take me to, and I like to discover wherever I am from a place of intimacy, and then let the people take me through through the city, and little by little allow myself to sink in. And of course, in that process, it's always lovely to have extremely intelligent hosts and people that open some doors and tell you a bit about the history, about, and then that way, that's the way I begin to try and look through the eyes. So of course you do, I mean, it's like the beautiful girl that has all the classical things, even if you know she's a cliche, you cannot help to actually go wow. And there are something, I mean, in those classical images that you do understand why you're attracted. It's not only because it's been fed to you 100 times, it's also because it carried something within itself. Then of course you want to be in control of a narrative and actually get out of it. And you know, being in Haiti through, or being top news, and usually for not the good reasons, and see how a certain type of images end up always taking the lead. And you know, to go with what we're saying, Nadia, is I've seen so many journalists come, and I thought they were curious because for a while I was a fixer. And so I remember taking those guys to amazing voodoo ceremonies with, I mean, one of the most beautiful voodoo ceremonies I had been. And then I'm like, can I see the images? And I realized that what they chose were all the cliches. So, you know, there was only one little candle on the skull, and that made the cover of the book. And then as I experienced the event with everybody, there was all the images, but I realized that they came with an image in their head and they actually reproduced it. And so that's when you're like, man, don't do that. Don't go for the easy take.
But that's,
you know?
that's what I meant about exchange, you know, because
Yeah.
We are sort of veterans of that too. It's a kind of opacity. We give them what they want and then we get on with our lives. So
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, even we are guilty of it too, you know. I mean, even in the Caribbean, like, and like I'm speaking like specifically to like, you know, catastrophes, like disasters, whatever. We'll go someplace and we'll look for the same type of image we've seen in like National Geographic or in CNN or whatever, and try to replicate that, like find a way into a situation to replicate that without like understanding the nuance of what we're dealing with, and try to show that in a respectful way, you know. I mean, like when the first week when I got to Jacmel, I met with this other artist, and she said to me, like, we don't want anybody photographing Haiti anymore, you know. And I was just kind of like, you know, it kind of interrupted me a bit because I wasn't quite sure like how to move forward from them. Like, okay, well, you know, what can I do that would honor the space in a way that shows something kind of familiar? Because the images specifically with the the faces mask kind of reference that kind of carnival culture, right? So I thought, okay, maybe this might be a way to kind of breach a relationship with the community. And eventually it was fine. Like, she saw the images and she was okay with it. But that kind of wall that people put up when an outsider comes in, but it's like you have to kind of build a relationship. And the good thing is being from another Caribbean island and having the ability to do that, like we have things that we have in common, I mean, I was able to kind of build a relationship with people on the ground when I said, I just went through a volcanic eruption, and then the whole interaction just changed with people. It was like, okay, well, you understand what it's like to go through something as, a large group of people trying to come to terms and cope with whatever trauma, even though Simmons, we didn't have any fatalities whatsoever, but it's just the trauma of seeing the land do something unusual, something that you have absolutely no control over, and these are the things that really that we share in common, beyond just like culture and like tourism and all these things. Like the environment, the land is what really connects us in a very real way.
Thanks, Nadia. I wonder if this is an opportunity to field questions. Somebody says they're in the middle of a thunderstorm while we're on the subject. That's very, I don't know how, I'm not sure how this thing works technically, but does someone have a question from the audience? And I am not in control of this platform, so.
Well, what we ask you to do is to raise your hand if you want to ask your question live. I also have a few questions that have come in on Facebook. So let's just give people a chance to ask some questions, and then I will read the ones that have come in on Facebook. All right, well, while we wait for questions to come in on Zoom, let me just read the comments that we have received on Facebook thus far. Well, Miriam Chancy is telling us that this is a great conversation, and I can only agree. Cynthia Neret says, listening to both artists, what's coming up is that both might come from different islands, but they might be very different at the surface. But when we go deep in the essence, it's the same things, same emotions that are expressed differently, uniquely, and that's the beauty. So we have two comments. Then I have a question from Rose Latour. Well, there are actually several questions about the use of blue. Let me actually start with the first one because it will make more sense. Two came from Rachel Douglas, who asked, could I ask Pascale to say more about the roles of the different blues in her work? And she asks, is blue also a color that Nadia uses often in her work? And then her second question is, has Nadia seen the Madame Sarah film about Haitian market women by Étienne Dupin? So.
Well, first, answering to Rachel, I'm going to show my nails, And if she was on, I gave her some nail polish because she's got blue hair. Blue is blue, and the blues, it's just amazing. And I think one of the Caribbean Sea, there is a relationship to the blue and also the sky, because we have it, maybe it's just all around the world, but then when you have the sky, and the sea, there is something there. Yeah, I don't know. It's true that I asked myself the same question, and as you've seen in the resume, suddenly I came to, because that resume I showed you pictures of, it's mainly not my work. It's much more what came out of my reflection and what I saw and what it made me think of. And it's true that I think the blue is something that we have in common. What would you say?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, no, I have not seen the film. But I'm happy you can send a recommendation to me. I'll definitely take a look at it.
Which film?
There was a question. There was a question regarding the film.
On Market Women. I've heard of it, but I've not seen it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was just answering that before I got into blue. You know, similarly to you, it's kind of a color that's difficult to avoid. I mean, I think I do play a lot with color in my work, but more recently I've been editing my images less and leaving the natural colors, I guess, to kind of draw people in a little bit to make it seem familiar. I mean, in the ocean, you know, doing underwater work is very limiting colors that you actually get to engage with down there. So, yeah, it's a color that definitely like brings out a certain emotion when you look at it. So it's kind of hard not to work with it. I guess it's like similar to the market woman in a sense. It's like, it's the cliche that you just keep on, you know, falling back on, but like anything, like it's how you decide to work with something.
Right, and there was another question following up on that from Rose Latour. She said the bleu Pascale, it actually has a name already related to you, Pascale. It's fascinating, and it felt like there is some connection between her creations and Nadia's, and I think we're discovering that. But she also asked, can Nadia Huggins say a bit more about the superposition and if she intends to explore this further? And I think she means a superposition of the different image segments and so on. And I think, Nadia, people are not necessarily aware of your other work. So I'm going to look if I can find an image for you that represents that.
Okay.
So just go ahead and I'll look for it.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, like I said, like that was the great thing about doing the residency. I really had like some space to kind of think about the expansive work I've been doing. I mean, maybe for like the last 6 years, I've kind of been labeled as an underwater photographer, which I'm not. I mean, Chris laughs at it because it's true. I mean, but I like to think what I do is more amphibious in nature, because I am thinking about the land and the sea as like, you know, two similar things in a way. I mean, obviously the colors are different. The types of things that exist in these spaces are different. The realities are different, but you know, I mean, at the end of the day, an island was submerged under the ocean at one point. It's just like the land has just found a way to you know, come above sea, you know? So like the way things develop on that is very different. So I have been thinking about the work I'm doing and more about like building an ecosystem, like I said, of images. So it's like creating context within the ocean. I mean, like I post a lot of like documentary type images of like leaves and, you know, whatever, like soil and mountains. But that's really just to give a context of like a space to put these creatures in so that people can understand what's really existing in these spaces. So yeah, these were the foundational images I had created before, and I had shown one of these pieces at Alice Yard. And you know, when Chris and I started speaking about it, he really kind of showed me that, you know, connection to carnival culture, which I hadn't thought about at the time. I mean, I just kind of was doing what felt natural to me, is to mask myself in something that was already in my environment. So yeah, thinking of like building these images more as like a carnival band. So, you know, like I have like the ocean section, I have like the land section, and you know, who knows what possibilities exist when technology improves. I mean, I might be able to go in space at some point, you know? So like I'm thinking about the work that I'm doing in a much more holistic way than just like being on the land and being on the sea.
Yeah. It was kind of interesting, you know, I could remember, it wasn't a formal residency, but I have this strange memory of you being in an apartment. Was it Medulla or something? And you were staying there for a while, and you had just maybe 5x7s, like stacked them. And
Yeah.
She called me and said, "Come, I want to show you something. I'm trying to make sense of it." And she had all these 5x7s on a table, and it's the same images, right? But you know, of course, 2-3 years later, you kind of formalize that, right? I'm trying to remember. And what year was that?
Yeah, it would have been like 2014, about the same time.
Because I myself looked at them and was very confused by them, but you know, in the sense that, yeah, like what's going on, you know? I'm having the same experience now, actually, looking at this notion of land. And because, one of the funny things about the Caribbean in general is that the whole Caribbean is kind of one tragedy, right? But it's like a big gear wheel in my mind, where you have these moments where it speeds up. There's a skip in the machine on the fan belt, and you get an earthquake, you get an upheaval, you get but in a sense, in terms of the whole place, it's a kind of machine in which the space has been violated and it's reacting. But it's not a behavioral thing. It's just the things we did over the last, 400 years have put us where we are. And in some places it's more evident than in others. So I find there's something really interesting about the juxtapositioning of the water and the land. And now the land, because land is moving in ways, it's geological time. So it doesn't occur to us in the same way as when we watch the tide moving, but the land is also moving. And every now and again, Trinidad has earthquakes, Jamaica has had earthquakes. We're in a kind of chain connected to Venezuela and so on, so
it kind of makes me think of before. At one point I was doing portraits of animals. Mm-hmm. And then I decided to work with, in Switzerland, they have cutout of papers and you have like the cows going up the hills. Mm-hmm. So I ended up making those animals being the land with all those little characters, on top. And it ended up being a big animal. And that's the paintings I was working on 2 months before the earthquake, where really the big animal, because sometimes we always feel like the living are up on top of the earth, and we forget that we are on something that has its own time and its own life. And even, we've been taught at school that the everything is moving. And I think in the Caribbean lately, we are remembered that. We are really conscious of that. And sometimes here in Europe, I feel like they're like, yeah, it's for you guys. I'm like, wait. Wait, because
I'm moving. I don't know what it's like in, say, St. Vincent and thing, but I could remember there are certain parts of Trinidad, like Icarcus, which is down in the southwestern part of Trinidad. That's like 7 miles away. Like Venezuela is literally right there. You get into the mouth of into the mangroves of the Orinoco Delta in 20 minutes on a pirogue. And down there, I remember once going there and there was a football field with goalposts and a little stadium that you see out in a country area. And then coming back like 6 months later and looking for it and then realize it's out at sea. And things like that. I remember years ago when they started construction further up the coast in Barbados, and then Accra Beach virtually almost disappeared, and that was like a big asset beach for Barbadians, because because my family is from Barbados, I would come and go from there. And there are parts of Trinidad on different islands, because that appear and disappear all the time. I think there was even a small island that pops out of the sea off the coast of Trinidad now and again, and then goes back down. That means the plates are moving, but there are few instances where we can actually physically see it.
It's also about Jacmel, where there's a lot of currents. Everybody's like, watch out. And, often the foreigners like, nah. And then bad things happen. But what I wanted to say was not that, was that the sea, I remember someone telling me, always remember that the sea is at least, 2/3 of the earth. And sometimes we feel we know the sea, but the truth is we just know a little tiny bit. we kind of know a lot of the land, but then in terms of the water, there's still big blues that with a lot of question marks in terms of what's going on.
Yeah. But I think, you know, I mean, for me, like working so heavily in the ocean, I've realized how much I actually don't know that's happening on land. And I think, again, it's like what we choose to look at, you know, like we have a very routine way of walking through our lives and not really looking at what's around us. I mean, yeah, of course, in the sea, we can't see what's below the surface unless we're diving, right? But we do the same thing on land. It's not any different. I mean, we have the same kind of, you know, walls up against seeing what needs to be seen. So, I mean, that I think that's like the biggest lesson I've been able to take from just going under and diving and looking at things that I don't understand. And I just realized I don't understand a lot of what's happening on land.
And then there's also this question of like, what is land? Because there's land and there's territory. So there's a kind of way in a lot of Caribbean spaces, you know, there's a kind of tension with the land, you know, like in different islands, there's different concepts of what is bush and what is not bush, or video. Just the term bush, you know, means something. It's kind of unmanaged, uncontained land. You know, I was kind of fascinated by that, you know, when you mentioned the word bush, you know, because I've been fascinated by what bush means in different parts of the Caribbean.
Yes.
You know, what it means in Guyana as opposed to what it may mean in Barbados. So I don't know. I mean, some places don't even really have bush, you know. I can imagine, like, is there bush in Cayman, you know, or Bermuda?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how it's kind of tamed in certain areas to kind of create boundaries between, you know, certain spaces, or like, you know, like you have like crown land looking a particular way. You have like people, you know, like somebody's private home, they kind of manicure their land in a particular way, and then there's like the roadside bush. I mean, it's something to definitely look at and think about, you know, what's really kind of happening there.
There's a lot being written now about sort of speculating about whether there's really just one ocean, and that there's something foolhardy about trying to demarcate territorialize the ocean, which is, you know, some writers and so on in different parts of the world have been talking more and more about that, you know. One ocean and sort of brown bodies moving, you know, and you know, it's kind of fascinating. That's how when people when the first sort of incursions into the Caribbean occurred, it's obvious that the populations living there were on the move, you know, moving from island to island, and they had an intimate knowledge of the ocean, and the islands were just places they stopped off to do things, rituals, or to settle based on seasons. You know, they move up and down, and even deep into the Amazon, they're beginning to find out that you know, as the water levels shift with the rivers moving, people lived on these weird mounds that they started finding in Guyana and Brazil that were there, that just disappeared, you know, with all the sort of weird relationship to water and solid ground, or you know, that's lost, you know.
I mean, it's like when you know, you have that kind of slope that gradually goes into the water. It's like, where does it end? You know, like where does an island really and truly end? Because it just kind of feeds into another island, and you know, that's like I mean, we're connected in a submarine way, you know. So
I'm not sure how people do in Trinidad or in Saint Martin, but in Haiti, one of the things that always amazed me is, first, you have to build the street by the sea. So you always have a road, and you know, they leave 10 meters to the sea, and then the house are built facing the road, because that's what interests almost everyone. And often in Haiti, we are giving our back to the sea, but somehow it's also, and people don't obligatory, now people go and bath more and more. You were saying more men, it's true, but also because when I was growing up, it was, you would go into the sea when you were sick. You know, it's really like a cure, something so you do once. and that relationship to the sea also, with the idea of who came from the sea and what happened, and the relationship with it is quite complicated. And I would say that until now in Haiti, the relationship with the element of water is still extremely complicated, because it's like it feeds us, but then at the same time, it's also where you put the trash. And to kind of, and I remember, for example, in Port Salut, that's in the south, they would put the hospital by the sea, the schools, and you're like, how come? You know, so, and the relationship to the sea is really strange sometimes.
Yeah, I think with that, it's just, you know, people, because they can't see what, you know, if it doesn't exist, if they can't see it. And like I said, unless you are diving and you like literally see any trash, you'll have a very different relationship with what's going in there. But, you know, I mean, I think that's just human nature. It's just like we want to put things out of our mind. We want to tune our back to whatever it makes us uncomfortable. So it's just easy. I mean, with regard to trash, you know, there's no such thing as a weight. Like it goes somewhere, it breaks down into something else. It's just a cycle, you know. It just doesn't disappear. Like nothing truly disappears in life. Everything just kind of transforms from one thing to the next, you know.
Moves around. Yeah.
But a beach has, you know, I don't even want to use the word beach, but you know, but I think in the Caribbean, that's a very interesting thing, because you know, people could be going to sunbathe in their bikinis. People could be going to pull a seine for fishing. People could be going for a ritual launching, you know, to do a perpetuation at the ocean. So the sea means many things to different people, you know, and it's always a struggle to arrive at one or find some consensus as to what it means and how people use it, because it's true what you say, Pascal. I remember when I was, you know, a child in Barbados, and the relatives that lived along the coast, the house faced the road, and there was a back step down to the sea, right? Where you wash clothes, you have your clothesline, and you know, it's in the back.
And as Sergine's saying, a lot of us don't know how to swim. I don't know.
But also, you know, when people come from abroad and they get a piece of land near the sea and they start to renovate it, they turn it around, because the sea means something to them. It's an asset, a different kind of asset. It's not a site of labor or a site of religious, you know, it's something else.
But in Haiti, I've seen a fisherman who actually, because some of the ways of actually winning the euro million, when you had floating cocaine coming to the coast. So some of the fishermen actually grabbed one, and that guy made a lot of money. And what did he do? He made a wall, but he made the wall between his house and the sea. You know, and I remember looking at the absurdity of that. I mean, but at the same time, somehow it made, I don't know, it might have made sense in his world. That's where he got that cocaine from, and that's where they were gonna come and get him. I don't know. But anyways, the image of closing off with a wall to the sea, because I still have that idea of if you're by the sea, you want to see the horizon, you know? And it's not an obligation.
Is there, do you see, there's a question to both, is there any questions?
Well, I have a question, but, you know, and preceded by a comment. You know, you mentioned the Cayman Islands, and one of the interesting things that shows how this relationship between the land and the sea is mediated and changes over time can be seen there, because traditionally the cemeteries in the Cayman Islands were between the road and the sea. right? And for various reasons, because that land was seen as potentially dangerous in case of storms and so on, and also because of the fact that it is a seafaring nation and that a lot of people die at sea, and there is no body to bury, so a lot of the tombs are actually symbolic. But know that the Cayman Islands has become a major center for international wealth and tourism and so on. Now, of course, those lands have become the most valuable ones, where all the big villas and so on are being constructed. So you have this renegotiation in that relationship with the sea. And I think seeing that happen in the Caribbean, this constant renegotiation that is caused by internal factors and external pressures and so on, I think is a really interesting thing. But what I really wanted to return to was this question of connections, because I travel my bit in the Caribbean, and we're also near, but we're also ridiculously distant when it comes to travel and having to go via Miami and overnighting in places to go to places that may be 40 minutes away. But we also work across different language zones, not only in terms of the dominant official languages, but also then the additional layer of the Creole languages, which further complicates that terrain. And both of you, Nadia and Pascale, went out of your language comfort zone with your residences. So I'm just kind of wondering how that affected the body of work that you produced.
I must say that I a lot of times, because I supposedly speak English, but a lot of times when people spoke too fast, I was nodding like I understood everything. But the truth is, I had no idea what was going on. But I did. I did. I don't know. I didn't feel. I mean, I felt I understand most of it. Of course, it was English, and so I didn't have that barrier. Then it was really funny for me sometimes to see French, and sometimes feeling that the Trinidadian had no idea it was French. So that, I would say, in terms of languages, that's the part that I thought was funny, is because there was this effort for people to forget there is a French history, and then there is the presence of French, that when you are French speaking, you're like, but hey, that was French. So
in the country areas, people say it's making hot, it's making cold.
Right, and it also speaks to how the Caribbean was reshaped by the Haitian Revolution, because the presence of French in Trinidad is ultimately a consequence of that, so that also is an interesting thing, But I'm wondering, Nadia, particularly, because in Haiti, French in many ways is if you speak it, it's a theoretical tool, because most people will speak Creole, so the French is not necessarily all that helpful. So what was your experience?
I mean, obviously, I did very minimal speaking with people. I mean, I tried to communicate with just like basic things, but the interesting thing about Creole is that I understand the body language of it, because that's regardless of, speaking, there's a way that we embody. We embody language that it's very easy to like understand when somebody's cussing you, or like when you're getting directions, or like there's just something that transcends language, and it was a good thing for me in the sense that it really just kind of forced me to switch off all of my other senses and just focus on observation and just like the visual. So in that sense, I found it really helpful to work in a place that I didn't speak the language. I mean, of course, there were limitations in like moving around and getting across certain messages, but it really forced me to just listen more than anything, and just be a witness in this situation rather than like trying to constantly negotiate something that, it ended up actually being much more useful in the residency than I thought. And I mean, it was my concern going into this situation, thinking, would I be able to communicate with people in the way that I needed to? But it worked out really well in the end. I found it a really beautiful experience.
I would add to that, as when you mentioned body language, and it's something I've been thinking about a long time in terms of the visual, because the visual is a kind of language. And so even though people talk about language differences in the Caribbean, the visual creates a bridge, and to some degree with the music as well. And I remember when Sophia Galisa, Murray, came from Puerto Rico to be in Trinidad. She made a very interesting point. She said it was the first time in her life she'd been in an English space, English Creole space, but English was not a hegemonic power language because, of course, Puerto Rico's relationship to the United States. And then we started discussing evocative similarities from the kind of popular Spanish spoken, the kind of Creole Spanish spoken in Puerto Rico to the Creole English spoken in Trinidad. So there's something there, in terms of gestures, non-verbal things. And so there's a whole field of possible zones, possible fields of communication that sometimes we take for granted because we think purely in terms of its literary or formal things. Because as Pascale discovered, yes, Trinidad has a French foundation to how we speak English, a French and perhaps a Bojpuri kind of foundation. So what happens is people who are Bojpuri speakers, when they come to Trinidad, recognize certain things, and people who are Creole speakers, more so than French speakers sometimes, come to Trinidad and they recognize something in certain grammatical configurations or certain terminologies. And we just take it for granted, So that was the situation with when Sophia came to spend time with us. She said, but this is the first time I've been in a Creole English space, as opposed to an American English